I sipped my morning coffee, letting the warmth seep into my hands as the city's skyline shimmered gold through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment. The hum of traffic below was nothing compared to the buzzing in my pocket, my phone vibrating insistently across the marble counter. I knew who it was before I even glanced: my parents. Their names flashed on the screen, and for a brief second, I felt that old, familiar knot of anxiety twist in my stomach. I smoothed my silk blouse, the ivory fabric cool against my skin, and took a deep breath. Just yesterday, Bloomberg had featured my company's earnings, my failed little startup, as my father used to sneer at dinner tables, and the one my mother quietly whispered about behind my back. Back then, they had mocked every pitch I made, every plan I dared to dream. Now, my modest apartment view wasn't modest at all, and my bank balance reflected years of quiet persistence they couldn't even imagine. I tapped the notification, another message. A single line from my mother. "We need to talk. Call us." My fingers hovered over the screen. I felt a surge of pride, a trace of irony, and beneath it all, a flicker of that old hurt. I remembered exactly how small and dismissed I had felt in their eyes. And now, after every sleepless night and every setback I had survived alone, it was finally time to see the disbelief on their faces. I leaned back, letting the sunlight warm my face, and whispered to myself, "Let's see how shocked they really get." It had all started in my tiny apartment 3 years ago, when the walls were plastered with sticky notes, and every surface was stacked with prototypes and business plans. I was 27, full of ideas and optimism, and utterly convinced that my little eco-friendly packaging startup could make a difference. My parents, however, saw nothing but a foolish gamble. "Emma, why don't you just get a real job?" my father had snapped one evening, shaking his head across the dinner table. The word "real" stung. My mother's laugh, soft but cruel, followed. "You're throwing money away. You'll never make it." My hands shook as I set down my fork, the lump in my throat threatening to choke me. I wanted to scream, to argue, to make them see that this wasn't a hobby, it was my future. But the words stuck somewhere between my heart and my lips. I remember the rain tapping against the window that night, and how it mirrored my own sense of hopelessness. I was exhausted, uncertain, and so achingly alone. The only solace came from the small silver charm bracelet my grandmother had given me before she passed. She had said, "Emma, the world will doubt you, but never doubt yourself. Carry this, and remember who you are." I clutched it that night, feeling its cold weight, and whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep. I decided, then and there, that I couldn't wait for their approval, or worse, their permission. If I wanted to survive, to prove my worth, I had to step out on my own. I packed my prototype boxes into my beat-up car, kissed the edges of my little apartment goodbye, and told myself, I will make it without anyone's help. I will show them I am not a failure. The sting of rejection burned, but it was a fire that fueled me. Every mocking comment, every sideways glance at family gatherings became a challenge I would meet head-on. That tiny apartment, my grandmother's bracelet, and my stubborn refusal to quit were all I had, yet in that moment, they felt like everything. The world outside might not believe in me, but I would believe in myself, no matter what. I started small, really small. My days blurred into nights. My apartment doubled as office, warehouse, and testing lab. I learned everything on the fly: accounting, marketing, client management, skills I never imagined I'd need. There were nights when I cried quietly over spreadsheets, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But every morning, I held onto my grandmother's bracelet, a reminder that belief in myself was non-negotiable. Early on, I met Olivia, a seasoned entrepreneur who ran a successful eco-products company. She didn't sugarcoat anything. "You'll fail a lot," she told me the first time we met, "but the ones who succeed are the ones who get back up every time." Olivia became my mentor, offering guidance and honest critique. She helped me refine my packaging designs, negotiate my first contracts, and slowly, carefully build a client base. My first big win was landing a local organic grocery chain. I remember staring at the signed contract in disbelief, my fingers trembling, tears threatening to fall. I wanted to call my parents and rub it in, but I didn't.
Not yet.
I posted a vague, modest update online. Exciting developments ahead. Nothing revealing. They had no idea that my failed business was finally turning a corner. The next months were a whirlwind. I worked through weekends, taught myself how to pitch to investors, and learned to handle rejection with grace. Every small victory, first profitable sale, first wholesale order, first glowing client testimonial, became a stepping stone. Slowly, I transformed from a struggling dreamer into a strategist, someone whose work people respected and whose presence commanded attention. Even as my success grew, I kept it hidden. Family calls were rare, and when they came, I spoke only in generalities about my projects. It wasn't malice. It was self-preservation. I knew the world I was creating for myself required focus and quiet determination.
They didn't need to see it yet.
And then, the tipping point came. A tech magazine requested a feature, impressed by my company's growth and innovation. Soon after, Bloomberg called. My earnings, my business model, my journey, it would all be out in the open, visible to everyone. I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and calm. The girl who once feared mockery now knew her worth. She had built something that couldn't be ignored, something that spoke louder than the past ever could. As I prepared for the feature to go live, I adjusted my bracelet, letting its silver charm rest against my wrist, and whispered to myself, "They'll see. Not because I want revenge, but because I've earned this. And I've earned me." I had made it this far on my own, and now, the world and my parents were about to witness the proof. Already knew what he would say, something awkward, something hedged with hesitation. A few minutes later, my mother's name appeared. "Emma, we need to see you," she said. There was no warmth, only the faint echo of the dismissive tone they used when I was 27 and still struggling to be taken seriously. I told them I'd come by the following afternoon. Casually, though inside, a slow thrill coursed through me. I arrived at their house carrying nothing but myself, my grandmother's bracelet hidden under the cuff of my crisp blouse. I let them settle into the living room first, a sort of unspoken ritual, before guiding them into my world. I had transformed their assumptions into an experience they weren't ready for. "Emma, wow." My father breathed, the words barely leaving his lips. I let the silence linger as their eyes took in the office I had set up in their guest space. They had never imagined this level of sophistication. The sleek oak desk, the curated art on the walls, the minimalist bookshelves lined with industry awards and framed articles featuring my company. And at the center, the Bloomberg feature, printed and framed, gleamed in the afternoon light. I didn't speak for a moment. I just watched. Their disbelief was deliciously slow, the way it twists when the mind refuses to reconcile past judgments with present reality. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she reached out, almost touching the glossy frame, almost accepting the undeniable proof. Finally, I broke the silence. "You see this?" I asked softly, letting my gaze sweep from the framed feature to the ledger, showing recent earnings. "This is the business you told me would fail. This is what happens when someone refuses to let doubt define them." Their reactions were a mixture of shame, awe, and disbelief. My father cleared his throat, as if rehearsing an apology he didn't know how to give. My mother swallowed hard, the words caught somewhere between her heart and her mouth. "Emma, we didn't realize." I smiled faintly, letting the weight of years of dismissal and mockery settle into the quiet room. "You didn't need to realize.
You only needed to watch," I said.
This company, these numbers, my success, none of it happened overnight, and none of it happened because I waited for approval. For a brief moment, the air was thick with everything left unsaid. I could almost see their minds racing. The dinners where I was mocked, the quiet scorn behind polite smiles, the years they assumed I was failing. And now, everything was illuminated in stark clarity. I didn't add another word. I let them absorb it, feel it, and reflect. They had expected the timid, struggling version of me. Instead, They were face to face with a woman who had taken every ounce of doubt, every insult, every eye roll, and converted it into triumph. The girl they called a failure was gone. In her place stood someone undeniable, unstoppable, and unapologetically herself. And in that moment, watching the disbelief settle into cautious respect, I realized something. The power had shifted. Not out of spite, but simply because I had earned it, quietly, patiently, relentlessly. After the initial shock, the room settled into a tense quiet. My parents, once the ones holding the authority in our household, now seemed almost childlike, unsure how to navigate a reality where I held the upper hand. I sipped my water slowly, letting them feel the weight of the pause. "I'm willing to let this conversation continue," I began, my voice calm but firm, "but there are conditions. Things must change, and they start with how you treat me and others from this moment on." My father shifted uncomfortably. I ignored the twitch in his jaw. "First," I said, "you must acknowledge that I am independent. My decisions, my work, my successes, they belong to me. No more condescending comments, no more dismissals. Respect isn't optional." My mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I continued, softer now but no less resolute. "Second, both of you must stop measuring me or anyone else by appearances or social expectations. Dreams don't come with guarantees, and success doesn't always look like what you expect. Appreciate the effort, the courage, and the resilience it takes to follow your path." I let them digest that, letting the silence work its subtle magic. Then I added my final point. "If we're going to rebuild this relationship, it must be rooted in honesty. No past grudges, no hidden judgments. Every time we meet, every conversation, it starts with openness."
Can you do that?
Their nods were tentative, but genuine. I could see the gears turning in their minds, imagining a new kind of relationship, one where I wasn't just their child, but a woman with her own life, her own rules, and her own voice. I leaned back slightly, letting my confidence fill the room. "I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I care. I want a family that grows together, not one that diminishes its members." My grandmother's bracelet glinted in the sunlight streaming through the window. I touched it briefly, a reminder that the strength I'd nurtured all these years came from someone who believed in me first. Then I said what I knew they needed to hear. "You've seen what I can achieve alone. Now, you have the choice to be part of it, but only if you're willing to change. Otherwise, you can watch from the sidelines." It wasn't a threat, it was clarity. I had spent years living in a shadow of doubt, in rooms where my potential was underestimated. Now the narrative had shifted. I was no longer seeking validation, I was defining the terms. Compassion mixed with authority, warmth balanced with firmness. They would either rise to meet me or stay rooted in old patterns. As I stood to leave, I noticed the subtle signs of realization on their faces, a flicker of pride in my father's eyes, a tentative smile from my mother. They understood, at least in part, that the daughter they once dismissed had become a woman whose boundaries were clear, whose vision was unshakable, and whose heart, though tested, was still capable of connection. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. The power had shifted, and I was ready to guide, not beg. Months passed, and the shift I had set in motion began to take shape. My parents weren't perfect, and neither was their transformation, but I watched subtle, meaningful changes. My father started listening before responding, asking questions about my work with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. My mother's sarcasm softened, replaced with quiet encouragement and pride that no longer hid behind whispers. It wasn't overnight, but it was real. I reflected often on the journey. The nights I cried alone over failed prototypes, the relentless grind, the moments of doubt when even my grandmother's bracelet felt like the only tether keeping me afloat. Every tear, every setback, had built the woman sitting here now, confident, resilient, and unapologetically herself. My company was thriving, my voice mattered, and I had learned that self-worth was something no one could bestow. It had to be claimed. One afternoon, While reviewing some quarterly reports, my hand brushed against the silver charm on my wrist. My grandmother's words echoed, "Carry this, and remember who you are." I smiled softly, realizing that her guidance had been both literal and symbolic, the strength to persist, to rise above criticism, and to define my own path. My parents, once the skeptics, had become tentative allies. Their pride was quiet but visible, a fragile yet growing recognition that the daughter they had underestimated was unstoppable. And in that recognition, I felt a peace I had never known, not just from success, but from clarity, boundaries, and emotional honesty. As I looked out over the skyline, sunlight painting the city in warm gold, I whispered to myself, a final affirmation of everything I had endured and achieved. They once called me a failure, but I never was. And now, they finally see the woman I've always been. I didn't need applause, validation, or acknowledgement to feel complete. The journey had been mine, every victory hard-earned, every lesson deeply personal. I had turned ridicule into resilience, doubt into determination, and heartbreak into triumph. And in that quiet, radiant moment, I understood, true success isn't just measured in earnings, features, or accolades. It's measured in the courage to rise, the grace to forgive, and the power to define yourself, entirely, unapologetically, and without compromise. Bottom of form.